So Leon Louw, a great man, a wonderful man. I've known him for more than 10 years. So he has really taught me a lot. Very much principled, strong values that are very much based on classical liberal values. So he's a wonderful man, a great South African. I'm a big fan.
He's an amazing guy. I think that comes out in the book.
I first met Leon back in 1984. I was an impressionable student, and I've been an avid follower of his since then. And I'm looking forward to reading the book.
I think a brilliant character, inspirational gentleman, an exceptional intellectual. I'm looking forward to really hearing more about the book. Of course, I've got a copy with me. Wish him all the best, and definitely one of the best dressed guys I've seen tonight.
So, Pussy, thank you very much for writing forward. We really appreciate it. It was wonderful. And now I'm going to ask you to come and say something.
Brilliant. I had a conversation with Leon when I met him for the first time in 2019. He came to see Bonang and I because we were trying to find a way of how we amend the Electricity Regulation Act in this country to allow for private sector participation, to allow for what we have in the country at the moment, where we have the rooftop solar panels, where we have private sector who is actually participating in the generation of electricity. In our meeting, Leon says, we don't need an overhaul of the Act. All we need is the insertion of one word in the Act to allow for private sector participation. He says the word that we need to insert is not. So once we've inserted the word not, that clause, whatever clause it was, I forget, would read, the state is not the sole generator of electricity in this country. I think that simplicity was very profound for me. It was very striking. It stayed with me. What Leon offers in this book is precisely that elegant simplicity, 250 pages of solutions. And what you have in this book is really a set of reforms, set of proposals of what we need to do to change this country around. The importance of reforms for me is actually very simple. Reforms are a way of de-risking the economy from politics. By implementing reforms, we are making sure that our economy is protected from the political volatility. Simple example, energy. The reason we have energy security in the country today, the reason we have ended structural load shedding, is because we managed to implement the necessary reforms in energy to allow for private sector participation, to do exactly what Leon was proposing in 2019, to ensure that the state is not the sole generator of electricity in this country. Through that reform, you're sitting in a totally different country from an energy security perspective. So if we were to have a state capture 2.0 as a country, we would be better off from an economic perspective precisely because we have implemented certain reforms. You are going to have a government that presides over a country with less state dominance. So if they decided to loot Eskom blue or grey or red, if they decided to loot Eskom again, at least we know that the generation of electricity in this country is no longer dependent on Eskom. You have private sector generating electricity. Transport and logistics is the same thing. We have now introduced private sector participation in Transnet, or rather in transport logistics. If they decide to loot Transnet again, then we know that our economy is not going to be fundamentally undermined. Because even if the state can't do transport logistics, then you are going to have the private sector making sure that imports and exports function as they should. That is the importance of reforms. That is what this book offers. It offers solutions about what we need to do as a country to ensure that our economic well-being is not compromised. So Leon, well done. Thank you for this set of initiatives. This book, if we were to even implement half of the suggestions that are contained here, we will be sitting in a fundamentally different country. It has been an absolute honor to write the foreword for this book. You need to get a copy. It is a very compelling and a very important read. Thank you very much for coming out, ladies and gentlemen.
As a young economist in the economics department, I can remember there was this, everybody was talking, did you see him? Did you see him? He's here, he's down there, Louw. I didn't really know who he was then. I mean, I was a young economist. I tried to figure out what life is all about. Later on, I gradually started to understand who Louw is, and I started reading a little bit more about him. And gradually I started to understand economics a little bit better. The only thing that I understood about economics, and that's pretty much the case still even today, is the fiscal side of it. So I analyzed the fiscal accounts, and when I started working in the financial markets, whenever somebody asked me about inflation, for example, I'll try to figure out how the fiscal accounts will impact on that. Or if you ask me about GDP, I will figure out how the fiscal accounts, so everything I hooked onto this fiscal account story. But I started following Louw and gradually started to understand economics a little bit later, and I started working in the financial markets. And then one day I got a call. I got a call from Louw. And I just couldn't believe it. I mean, I was so nervous. And he asked me if I would come and talk. I think it was about the budget. I can't remember. I think it was a budget, if I'm not mistaken. And I spoke about the budget that day. From then on, Louw would call me every night. I never called him, or hardly ever. I mean, I simply did not have the guts to call him. I mean, I never called him. But he would call me every now and again to ask one or two things. And believe me, nothing ever about the ideologies or anything. Some technical questions, perhaps, about this and that and the other, but never about real ideologies or philosophy or anything about that. And that's how I got to know Louw. And it's very true, I can tell you that, I can assure you. And that is that eventually you see his point of view. And I can remember we had this big debate about smoking. When there was this law, they started introducing all sort of laws against smoking. And I told him, I think that's one of the few times that I called him, because he was kicking up a big fuss in the press about these laws are bad and wrong. And I called him and said, listen, come on, you've got more important things to do. Why worry about smoking? You're not even a smoker. And they said, but that's what's important, because if you let go on one of these very important principal things, then eventually you will slip on other more important things as well. So that's how I knew Louw for many years, and it's been a really wonderful journey for me, Louw, to learn from you. So, and I want to ask my first question to you, and I know everybody's going to ask you when you started turning, what's it, left or right or pink or blue or whatever, when you started turning into becoming can I use words like a libertarian, free market supporter, freedom lover? How did you become not a communist? How did you end? What is the journey that you took not to become a communist, or eventually moved away from communism?
Well, thanks. I've got to start before that. I come from a very right-wing Afrikaner community of Potchefstroom called the Doppers. It's the most conservative, most right-wing. That's the community I was in. Not my home was different. My father was kind of apolitical and pro-freedom. So I came from that, and then I went to university at Witwatersrand Wits. My father wanted his kids to learn to speak English, because he said English is the language of the world, and if you can't speak English, you are not going to be able to succeed. So he sent us to English schools and universities in order to learn English. And at Wits, of course, what I encountered was this radical ideological philosophy and anti-apartheid. And it made sense to me. I became immediately anti-apartheid and wanted to fight, and I joined the anti-apartheid movement and fought for it and got tear gassed and baton charged and arrested and all of the stuff that you have to do if you were fighting it then. And it was dangerous. It wasn't easy. And I became a courier for, at that time, the ANC. I'm not pro-anti-ANC, by the way. I'm just for good policies. I don't really care which political party it is. I'm just for the right policy. I don't care who's in power. Just do the right thing. And so at WITS I became anti-apartheid, a radical. I'm always, I guess, some kind of purist. And that meant I had to be a communist. If you were anti-apartheid, you were a communist. That was it. So I became a communist, and more particularly for those who are more nuanced about this, I became specifically a Trotskyite. There were Maoists and there were Marxists, and Marxism had, I remember, 36 schools of Marxist thought. And most of the fighting that communists did was actually amongst themselves, against each other. So we battled there, and I went to these meetings of intellectuals at WITS, sitting in air-conditioned offices, talking about the virtues of the working class and equality and so on. And I would say to them, tell me, why are we against apartheid land law? Because communism says all land should belong to the state. That's what apartheid says for black people. All black people should live on government-owned land. So why don't we agree with that? Why aren't we for that? And I never got good answers, just didn't. So, and then street trading. I saw Granny Moyo, one of the street traders in Bree Street, being arrested and brutalized by the police, her goods confiscated. It seemed to me here you couldn't find a more harmless person, a more virtuous person, sitting on the side of the road innocently selling fruit or whatever it was. And she was thrown into the back of a police van while I witnessed this ghastly sight. And her head banged against the back of the thing and cracked her skull, and she died. They killed her for selling fruit on the side of the road. And I went along to these meetings at WITS, and I said to these commie intellectuals, I said, now tell me, is she a capitalist? Is she a working class? Or should she be allowed or not? And I don't see Rumbi Kongara here, who's a good friend of ours, heads up the Joburg Street Traders movement. But anyway, Rumbi lost her job and became a street trader, and then eventually built herself up, and she now owns a beautiful shop in Centurion. Everyone should visit Rumbi's shop. Sells kind of fantastic African made stuff that she makes and her children make. And so I thought, now Rumbi, she goes from being unemployed to being a street trader to owning a little store, and then eventually she can have branches and she can become a national chain and become a multi-billionaire. And at some stage, where is it that she stops being good? You know, is size relevant? And I said, no, hold on a sec. People should just be free, regardless of size, regardless of background, regardless of color, race, religion, gender, etc. And so then I discovered that that was called in those days Ayn Rand's objectivism, capitalism. I don't like the word capitalism because it means too many different things to different people, but free market, personal freedom, libertarian, classical liberal. And so I migrated from being a radical right-wing apartheid. I was a little kid, went to the funeral of Verwoerd, who was considered some kind of god, to becoming a hardcore radical communist Trotskyite in particular, and then thinking, no, because of what I saw being done to a street trader, no, actually free market is correct. Free market is freedom, what I call capitalist acts between consenting adults. And so that's how I moved. And it's a longish story, more than you wanted, but that was my migration through three big philosophical, intellectual phases of life. And now I really am happy. Some of you might be amazed. Obviously, I have very, very good relations with Herman and Action SA, but also it might be surprisingly, for some of you, surprising economic freedom fighters, EFF, Mkonto, my relations with them, and I work with, I would love to be able to share some confidences, which I can't. But yes, I'm interested in simply saying to everybody, if your objective is to have more black people owning land, you see, I don't want to fight BEE or expropriation without, I don't want to say what I'm against. I want to say, what must you do to bring that about? What is a fair, reasonable, just, efficient way to get that consequence? And so whatever the political objective is, most political objectives are ones we can live with. And so the question is, what's the best way for that objective to be achieved? And that's really what I try to do. Instead of criticizing, I don't criticize. I don't criticize ministers or policies. If I think there's something wrong with NHI, National Health Insurance, I say what should be done about health, not what's wrong with NHI. That's easy. Anyone can do that. That's not intellectually demanding. But if you say which health policy should we have, that is a different thing entirely. So my approach is I don't criticize bad policies. I don't criticize politicians. I try to get them to do things that are more likely to achieve the goals they want, assuming those goals are ones one can live with. And most political goals are things most decent people can live with.
So that was his journey for a few years, but I've got a suspicion you went through a kind of a journey the past year or two as well.
Oh no, most definitely.
And I know couldn't have been that easy always.
No, actually, the reason I wrote the book or accepted the commission was because I thought that I agreed with Leon. You know what I mean? I sort of thought of myself as more or less in the kind of same sort of frame and all of that sort of stuff. But every book that you read, you want to change you, a little bit. And writing this book changed me a lot in ways that I found very unusual and very rewarding. And that was a surprise because I'm very much in the camp. I'm not in Leon's camp. I'm in the camp of writing things in the newspaper because I think that's going to help. And it turns out it doesn't. You've got to do more than that. You have to be more than simply the critic. And so that was my journey. Was sort of interacting, talking about an extraordinary array of different topics and subjects, and from the very small to the enormously large. You don't change policy from the outside. You change policy from the inside, and you do that by waiting for people to be ready to make the policy change.
Tell me, Leon, how many years is this now? Can you highlight one or two things where you changed the minds of our political leaders, or leaders, not only political leaders, that you think it had a huge, I know of one or two, that had a huge impact? Maybe just one or two highlights, perhaps?
No, let's be very clear, as I had this a lot with Tim during these interviews. The way he went about it was incredibly rigorous. A 2-hour interview once a week, rigorous questions, lots of research that he did. And I kept saying to Tim, for example, I wrote an economic policy for the reincorporation of Hong Kong into China, and I was an advisor to the Chinese government's Committee on the Basic Law, which ended up creating the special economic zones. And I could either have a big ego and think I made a difference and I contribute to the well-being of 1 billion human beings, or I was irrelevant. It would have happened without me. And you just don't know. So where I worked for things like, say, for example, the scrapping of agricultural control boards, that was done in the New South Africa by Derek Hanekom in particular, ironically a communist, was the one who freed up the agricultural markets. And he got the Free Market Award from us, recommended by me. And now did my work to get rid of the agricultural control boards bring that about? I have no idea. It might have happened without me. I have to be the fact is, if I didn't live and I didn't exist, it might have happened anyway. But the fact that I worked for and lobbied for something that happened, and there are many, many examples, and Busi mentioned some very kindly. Many things that I worked for happened. Tim wrote about them in the book. Did I influence that or bring it about? I don't know. I like to think I did contribute. I would like that to be true for my own sense of contentment.
Okay, so can I get some... Yes, sir. Yeah, yes.
Good evening, everyone. Starlink. So South Africa has an opportunity to provide free internet access to South Africans, basically almost everyone. So South Africa, with their high tax rates, I think 35% for them to operate Starlink here, do you think they are making a big mistake by not allowing Elon Musk to operate Starlink?
The answer is I want the market to be free. I want you to decide whether or not you use Starlink, and not some politician or parliament or parliamentary portfolio committee or something like that. Or who's the people who regulate a network? ICASA. I don't think ICASA must decide, you must decide. And so for me that's very simple, straightforward. Let Starlink and any other service be free to operate and be provided. For example, in every single small town and city, you now have to get a license in order to provide Wi-Fi in that town. That should be scrapped. Anybody should be free in their backyard or on their roof to provide Wi-Fi for every little town and village and traditional village and area and so on. So there should be nobody who doesn't have easy and cheap, preferably absolutely free access.
Yes, Pete. I have a question for Leon. Taking on to the media question, but Leon, over the years, when I was a small boy, I remember my mother and father discussing the solution. I just remember that it picked up and sparked an interest. But over the years, you would have seen your ideas and your publications and your advocacy being treated differently by media outlets, maybe various media outlets over time. Reflecting back on that career you've had of offering solutions, how would you describe the reception in various periods? When was it best received? When was it worst received? Which kind of people were most receptive? Reflections on how your ideas were received by the media.
Sure. Thanks, Piet. As you'd expect from Piet Sakelicha, a tough question to answer. When the country was in crisis, when, the end of apartheid, there was talk of civil war, if you remember all the sabotage, the bombings, the Magoo's Bar, all sorts of horrible things happening, people dying in detention. It was just a very, very ghastly period. And many people, and the township unrest and riots and so on. And I was in the middle of that. I was going in and out of Soweto during the Soweto riots, taking food parcels to the families of detainees and so on. So I was there and I saw some pretty ugly stuff from both sides. And that's what always fascinates me. If you take, Israel and Gaza, Ukraine and Russia, whatever, Iran, internally two sides of the Iran conflict, both sides can become pretty beastly, and that is sad. But when we were against the wall, when it was just completely looked as if civil war was imminent, that's when the place was open to solutions, when we were welcomed everywhere. Community meetings in every dorp and village. In Soweto, I was going into Soweto before there was any electricity. You would go in the middle of winter on a clear, sunny, clear starlit day in Joburg. You drive into Soweto, you can see nothing because of the smog, because of the burning of firewood and coal and charcoal and so on. Those were different days. Going in there, and everyone was wanting a solution. And if you spoke about how about doing this, how about doing that, if you remember Agri Cluster came up with nation building. Let's build the nation. Let's build one nation and stuff like that. That was in a time of crisis. Then things got quite well in the new South Africa, ticked along, and then it's difficult to sell solutions because people aren't searching for solutions. It seems sort of okay, just let it be. Now we are back to where there is so much going wrong, so much that is upsetting people, so much that is a crisis, this unemployment number, whatever it actually means, and I have to be clear about that. We don't know really how much unemployment there is, and what does it mean to say 30% or 40%, or young black women, 70%, 80%. Every 10 young black women you see, 8 of them don't have a job, or job seekers. Now this is pretty ghastly. Well, what are they in fact doing? They're alive, they're not getting social grants, so they're somehow surviving. Now we're in a crisis, and I'm finding talking solutions again is is well, the crisis means people are now open to solutions.
Let me just finish off. Leon, you've been saying all the time that you don't know whether you've had an impact on this and that or the other. I can promise you, you've had a huge impact on many, many things. So, certainly you had an impact on the way I see life.
That's
And
a
Tim,
great honor.
thank you so much for this wonderful book. And then a last question on you. What does it feel like to be always right? Thank you very much.
No, I'm not always right. I was once wrong. I thought I was wrong, but it turned out I'd been right.